What's up, everybody? Wes Goldberg here from Locked On Heat. If you didn't check out today's show featuring Brendan Tobin from WQAM, definitely go ahead and check that out. We talked about a lot of things in terms of where this Miami Heat season is going, what this offseason can look like, a bunch of really great stuff. So I'd appreciate if you went and checked that out. Subscribe to Locked On Heat on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. But one of the things that we did not get into with Tobin was Jaylen Brown, which is not just a storyline for the Miami Heat worth keeping an eye on, but it's a storyline that a lot of people around the NBA are keeping an eye on, specifically Jaylen Brown's future in Boston. And maybe is this the kind of guy that the Miami Heat and other teams could look to try to acquire this offseason? Jaylen Brown, is he the kind of star worth pursuing for the Miami Heat? Is he the whale, so to speak, that the Heat's front office has been waiting on? So just some background on this really quick. When asked about whether or not he wants to stay in Boston long-term, Jaylen Brown told The Ringer, quote, "I don't know. As long as I'm needed, it's not up to me. We'll see how they feel about me over time and how I feel about them over time. Hopefully, whatever it is, it makes sense. But I will stay where I'm wanted. I will stay where I'm needed and treated correct." Then asked how long he wants to play with Jason Tatum, he keeps going, Jaylen Brown does, saying, quote, "I just enjoy the time that you have now. If it's your whole career, it's your whole career. If it's not, it's not." Then he goes on to mention how Michael Jordan retired a Wizard and those kinds of things. Throughout the interview with The Ringer, and then he did another one with the New York Times, it's clear that Jaylen Brown was upset and by the trade rumors constantly involved in whether it's Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis a few years ago. He's been bothered a long time by being involved in those trade rumors pretty constantly. And then he was not happy with how the Ime Udoka situation played out. He thought there was a lack of transparency by the organization. And he also has an issue with certain parts of the fan base. And he got into that pretty in depth in that New York Times piece. So, look, all this does not mean that Jaylen Brown is leaving Boston, but we could say that it's not gone great. Like, it's not been 100% great for Jaylen Brown in Boston either. There's definitely things that he's upset about. And when you're looking across the NBA, stars that have been on the move, like there have been stars that have demanded trades for less than what Jaylen Brown has dealt with already with the Boston Celtics. Again, does not mean that it's going to happen, but when you consider all the things that went down, these quotes, the fact that Jaylen Brown thinks that there's still, a ceiling to scratch for him. Maybe he wants to lead his own team. Like he keeps hinting at all this stuff, so it's worth keeping an eye on. Jaylen Brown, 26 years old, small forward, two-time All-Star. He averaged more than 20 points per game in the last 4 years, including 27 points this year. He can be absolutely elite defensively. And the big thing here is that he's going to be up for a big extension this offseason, one that could pay him $41 million a year for 4 years, or if he makes All-NBA this season, which seems probably likely at this point, an extension that could pay him up to $58 million per year for 5 years. All right, so how the Boston Celtics handle this, they've got a bunch of young guys. They obviously have Jason Tatum. Do they want to pay Brown the full max if he does end up making All-NBA, 5 years, $58 million? We'll see. Players like Jaylen Brown usually just get that, right? And it's not a whole lot of negotiation. Like I said, two-time All-Star, could be on the All-NBA this year. 27 points per game as the number 2 option on offense. Continues to make some improvements every single year. Two-way presence, offense and defense. And young players like him get paid those extensions, whether it's the $41 million for 4 years or $58 million for 5 years. They usually just get it, okay? But we'll see. We'll see how the Celtics treat Jaylen Brown. We'll see if Jaylen Brown even wants that extension, or if he says, you know what? Based on what he's saying here, does he even want to be in Boston long term? Or would he prefer to make this money somewhere else? So a lot of interesting stuff to get to. If Jaylen Brown does end up asking for a trade, or if the Celtics make him available, however it plays out, there's going to be a ton of teams in on him. You saw interest in Mikal Bridges, a two-way wing. You saw interest in OG Anunoby, a two-way wing. Reports of them being offered 3-4 first-round picks for either player. It's going to be a lot more. It's going to be a lot more for Jaylen Brown if he becomes available. A lot more teams interested, and potentially a lot more coming back if Brown is available, because he's kind of, the best version of the Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby kind of guys. Few guys at his age, with his stats, his playoff experience, and his two-way upside. So all of this to say, how can the Heat get in on Jaylen Brown? So you've got two options. Option one, you trade Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry's expiring, probably throw Caleb Martin in there, and 3 first-round picks. That's the most first-round picks that the Heat can offer. Technically, they can only trade 2 right now. It could become 3 if they lift protections on a future first that they owe to OKC. So as much as 3 first-round picks, Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry's expiring contract, and Caleb Martin, that gets you up to that money that you'd have to probably get into on, and then and gives the Celtics quite a bit of stuff back in return. Tyler Hero, a scoring guard, Caleb Martin, a two-way wing who can help fill the void of Jaylen Brown, even though he's not going to replace Jaylen Brown by any mean, but you're probably trying to get a wing back if you're Boston, and then Kyle Lowry's expiring, which the Celtics might be able to flip for something else, or you just have his expiring on the books for a year. I don't know, whatever. It helps the money work. That would be option one if you're the Miami Heat, something looking like that. Then you have to ask yourself the question if you're the Heat. Would Jaylen Brown be happy being the second option behind Jimmy Butler, because he's clearly not totally stoked and not all in on the idea of being the number 2 behind Jason Tatum? Now, I'd make the argument that Jimmy Butler is a much more differential star than Jason Tatum. Already this year, Jimmy Butler is 3rd on the Heat right now in field goal attempts per game, right? So I don't think that would be as much of an issue, because I think if Jaylen Brown were to come to Miami and Jimmy Butler were still on the roster and Bam Adebayo were still on the roster, I think both Jimmy and Bam would relish the fact that they don't have to take the most shots. That's kind of out of their character. It's kind of out of their profile. They don't want to be those kinds of players. Where Jaylen Brown, at this point of his career, kind of sounds like he wants to be that kind of player. It kind of sounds like he wants to take the most shots and be the number 1 scoring option. So in terms of whether or not Jaylen Brown would work with Jimmy Butler and Bam, I don't think that there would be any concern whatsoever. And then you've got 3 all-NBA caliber defenders that you're kind of building around. So that's the first option. Before we get to option number 2 for the Miami Heat, here's what could be on the table for from other teams that would be in on Jaylen Brown. So just some ideas, just throwing some stuff in the trade machine, kind of working on some things here. Would the Celtics, or I'm sorry, would the Hawks get in and offer the Celtics DeAndre Hunter, Clint Capella, and picks? So DeAndre Hunter, nice young two-way wing. Clint Capella, who could be more of a stable factor there in the middle, with Rob Williams being injured every other day, and then Al Horford getting up there in age, and then you throw in some picks if you're the Hawks. The Warriors can offer Jonathan Kuminga or Andrew Wiggins. The Nuggets could offer Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon. They could put those guys on the table. The Grizzlies have a bunch of young players and picks that they could put on the table. You've got the Portland Trail Blazers that can offer Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, and picks. Then we have a couple of, kind of crazy, huge blockbuster type of options going back to the Trailblazers. Would it be nuts if they just offered Damian Lillard and reset their timeline with a young all-star wing in Jaylen Brown, who actually kind of fits with their other young players, Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe? Like, that's a nice young core to build around. If the Trailblazers decide to kind of reset their window here, Damian Lillard makes a lot of sense for Boston. He's just a score guy going after rings. One of the best point guards in the NBA. Marcus Smart kind of sliding back this year. Whatever. I don't have to sell anybody on Damian Lillard. He's awesome. But kind of makes sense for the Trailblazers if they try to go in that direction. And then the other crazy option, the Lakers. What if they were to just offer Anthony Davis? We know that the Celtics, and this was back in the Danny Ainge days, Danny Ainge obviously now with the Utah Jazz, but when you talk about trying to solidify the middle of that defense and the middle of that offense for the Celtics, if you're not totally sold on Rob Williams and Al Horford there as long-term options, if the Lakers just offered Anthony Davis straight up for Jaylen Brown, I don't know. Would the Celtics say no if it's clear that Jaylen Brown is on his way out? I don't know that beats a whole lot of what else is on the table. Or I don't know that what else is on the table can beat an Anthony Davis offer, except for, of course, the Damian Lillard offer, which is a big if. That brings us to option 2 for the Heat. What if the Heat came out and just offered Jimmy Butler straight up for Jaylen Brown? Boston would actually be getting the better player right now. I don't think that there's any doubt that Jimmy Butler is a better player than Jaylen Brown right now. He is older, but he can help the Celtics win a championship right away. Kind of gives them that X factor, that mental toughness, that physical toughness that the Celtics have not had over the last couple of years, which, we'll see how this postseason goes. But if the Celtics fall short again, you would imagine that it's going to be the same situation for the same reasons as why they've fallen short in the past, right? Jimmy Butler fixes a lot of those things. And if it's just Jaylen Brown for Jimmy Butler straight up, the Celtics would still have all of its depth and the better player and kind of an ideal running mate next to Jason Tatum, where Jaylen Brown is sort of pining for more Jimmy Butler, as we've already covered, probably wouldn't be, right? If anything, he would relish the fact that he's got Jason Tatum on his team and does not have to take all the shots all the time. So that would be something that, I don't know. Does Jimmy, when you're talking about, look, those crazy offers, Anthony Davis, Damian Lillard, like not all that stuff is going to be on the table. I was just sort of throwing it out there. But if the Heat put Jimmy Butler on the table, chances are that's the best player that the Celtics could get. A lot of these other ideas involve sort of young players with upside. I don't know that the Celtics are in on young players with upside. Their window is open right now. Jason Tatum is good enough to win a championship right now. This team has enough depth right now that they might not be able to hold on to in the future. So if the Heat are offering Jimmy Butler and a chance to legitimately win the championship, that could be something that the Celtics have to consider if, again, it's clear that Jaylen Brown is not coming back. In terms of the Heat, if they get eliminated early in this postseason, they're going to have to make some tough decisions this summer. So if they're somehow able to pull off option one, that's a core of Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Jaylen Brown. Butler, Bam, Brown. Even by losing picks and depth in that kind of deal, it might still just be a no-brainer for the Heat to go in that direction if they can. But as we've just covered, I don't know that the option one, I don't know that the Heat are going to have enough to go get Jaylen Brown if they're not putting Jimmy Butler on the table, which brings us to option two. If you do end up trading Jimmy Butler for Jaylen Brown, now you're looking at a core of Tyler Hero, Jaylen Brown, and Bam Adebayo. It's not as good as the first option, but it's young. The team, those three players, at least theoretically, play well with each other on paper. The Heat would still have whatever picks they have now. They would still have those picks, and they would have a clear path for building with a guy with a good young player in the backcourt, a good young wing, and Bam Adebayo, who's among the best young centers in the NBA. So no matter what the option is, Jaylen Brown's going to be the kind of whale that the Heat have been waiting for, right? We know that. The problem is plenty of other teams have been waiting on a whale like Jaylen Brown too.